how we can ultimately dismantle any of it if we don't stick to a intensely radical politic.
You're not broke if you're taxing rich people.
We break production for profit and we replace it by production for need.
This event is brought to you by Haymarket Books. Now more than ever, it is critical to support independent publishers, independent bookstores, and independent voices. There are two ways you can do this today. First, by buying books from Haymarket at haymarketbooks.org. And secondly, by joining the Haymarket Book Club. The following event will be recorded and shared afterwards on the Haymarket Books YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video now, and share it with as many people as possible. If you like this event, be sure to catch these upcoming events in Haymarket's live stream series. You can register for these upcoming events on the Haymarket Books Eventbrite page. If you miss an event, you can listen to the recording afterward by subscribing to our podcast, Haymarket Live, wherever you get your podcasts. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. We are moderating the chat, but we cannot guarantee that everyone will observe our community guidelines. People who violate these guidelines will have their comments deleted as quickly as we are able. This event will have live closed captions. Instructions for accessing the captions will be posted in the chat. We should have time for Q&A. So please post your questions in the YouTube chat window, and we'll get to those later in the program. Thanks for joining us today. Our event will begin shortly.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aline Batarseh, and I'm the Executive Director of Visualizing Palestine and co-editor of Visualizing Palestine, a Chronicle of Colonialism and the Struggle for Liberation, which is going to be the topic of our conversation today, as we're doing the virtual book launch of this amazing book that has been a labor of love for our team over a bit more than 3 years. We are gathering here today after almost a year of ongoing Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank, an intensification of more of a century of ethnic cleansing policies against Palestinians. On a daily basis, we are witnessing the atrocities that our loved ones are experiencing in Palestine, from mass killings to mass displacement to mass arrests to suppression of dissent, to Israeli settler violence in concert with the Israeli state. While at the same time, we're also witnessing increased awareness across the globe of this reality, thanks to the many activists across the globe that refuse to remain silent. Today, we will be discussing this book, which has been a labor of love for our team, as a reflection of the determination of movement builders to make the exhaustively documented realities of Palestinian life undeniably visible. I'm joined here today with beloved colleagues and movement activists. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. I will introduce them briefly, and these will not be comprehensive. There's so much more to say about each one of them. I will start with my colleague, Yosra Gazzar, who is the art director at Visualizing Palestine. She is co-editor of Visualizing Palestine, A Chronicle of Colonialism and the Struggle for Liberation. All of the beautiful visual art that is displayed in this book has been her labor of redesigning the visuals to fit the book, resizing them, and also working on the beautiful cover that you see today. Hopefully, if you have it in front of you, or when you buy it soon. Thanks, Linda, for sharing that. I'm also joined by Noura, Erakat, human rights attorney and professor of Africana Studies and the Program of Criminal Justice at Rutgers University. She is the author of Justice for Some, Law and the Question of Palestine, Stanford University Press, 2019, which received the Palestine Book Award and the Bronze Medal for the Independent Publishers Book Award in Current Events, Foreign Affairs. She is co-founding editor of Jadaliya and an editorial board member of the Journal of Palestine Studies. Noura is also a co-founding member of the DC Palestine Film and Arts Festival and a board member of Palestine Legal and the Center for Constitutional Rights. Noura is a co-founding member of the I mentioned that already. So I'm not doing you justice, Noura. There's so much more to say about you, but I want to keep it short so we can start the discussion. Linda Sarsour, racial justice and civil rights activist, seasoned community organizer, and direct action strategist. She is the co-founder of the first Muslim online organizing platform, Empower Change, who we work with regularly, and co-founder of Until Freedom, an intersectional racial justice organization focused on direct action and power building in communities of color. Linda was one of the national co-chairs of the largest single-day protest in Palestinian history, in U.S. history, the Women's March on Washington. She has been named amongst 500 of the most influential Muslims in the world. She was recognized as one of Fortune's 50 greatest leaders and featured as one of Times Magazine 100 most influential people in the world. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I would like to pass on to Noura and Linda to share with us their reflections on how both of you have used VP's work as movement actors, VP's role in the movement from your perspectives and your reflections on the book. I should also mention that both Linda and Noura provided blurbs for this book, which we are very grateful for, and thank you both so much for your endorsement of this work.
Thank you so much, Aline. Thank you to the Visual Palestine team. It's an honor to be here with Linda. I'll just start by saying Visualizing Palestine took on the really difficult job of being able to summarize in visual form what would otherwise be at least one book, if not volumes, that tries to explain the Palestinian condition. The affliction that we're often responding to is one of a tremendous amount of myth-making that accompanies any settler colonial project that indicates the absence of an indigenous population and an indigenous people with the right to self-determination, coupled with some sort of divine right to settle and to take their place. And so that mythology, that beginning mythology, brings with it a tremendous amount of obfuscation, direct misinformation, a repression of knowledge production, all of which we're seeing play out in real time during this ongoing genocide, but one which has really shaped the Palestinian condition, which is what explains in many, many ways, amongst activists, we have to let the people know, right? So many activists, they want to create fact sheets and they want to, do the teach-ins, because if more people understood, then more people would change their mind about, for example, if you live in the heart of empire, the US's support for this ongoing Nakba that we endure. For academics, it creates an imperative, especially scholar activist academics, to respond to those questions, to lift up the empirics, either as historians, as anthropologists who are able to tell us about daily life, myself and others as legal scholars, in order to manifest how the law is shaping these conditions and perpetuating ongoing Nakba, and so on and so forth. And so visualizing Palestine, I think, straddles, two of these spheres of both being on the activist front, of wanting to empower and inform, and simultaneously wanting to capture so much of this in visuals, right? If you don't have time for a 45-minute teach-in, perhaps you have time to take a look at a single poster in order to understand, for example, that Palestinians aren't impoverished because they don't have the wherewithal and the capacity, the resources and the knowledge to till their own lands, to produce their own goods, to export, to import, to create systems of survival and thriving, but instead because of the deliberate theft of water and the systems that enable that theft of water that is captured in one of the visuals that you have created. And so I've used that to the extent that I can. And also, to be completely honest, I've benefited. Sometimes I'll just study a sheet so that I'm not as long-winded as I am, as you can tell, but instead that I can come out and summarize what it is that I'm trying to explain by using that sheet as a blueprint.
Thank you for that, Noura. Noura, of course, encompasses a lot of the same things that I believe about visualizing Palestine. I'm not a legal scholar and I am not an academic. And so for me, I am an organizer and I want to build power, and it has to be based on information, because informed people are people who are more likely to act. And when people say knowledge is power, it's actually not a cliche. It's in fact true that if you have the knowledge, then you have the power to change the things. And there's also another cliche people often use, which is a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I truly believe that. Sometimes you can convey messaging and information and facts through imagery, through art, in ways that you cannot do through language, because people learn in different ways. But what we do know is most people, of course, those who are able, learn visually. At Empower Change, which is an organization I started about 7 years ago to build political power amongst Muslim Americans and Muslim American communities across the country. And of course, in that work, our allies have joined us in our work. I often go to Visualizing Palestine, not only to use the content that they have already created, but also to ask them to create content for our campaigns. And two examples that I'll give are, we have a campaign called Banking on Solidarity. And this campaign is about Citibank, which many of you know is one of the largest financial institutions in the world, that not only has a history when it comes to Palestine and being a force of evil in Palestine, but also in Haiti, and being able to take two communities that are impacted by one monstrous corporation and being able to develop a campaign that not only informs, but actually builds solidarity and brings people together. And that is the type of powerful work that they are doing at Visualizing Palestine. And another one was during the beginning of this genocide, I had community leaders who came to me feeling that something had to be done. We had to be in the mainstream media. There are people in our community who still believe that we need to be in front of the eyes of everyone, not just, the left and not just the progressive kind of media outlets. And so I went to Visualizing Palestine and I said, hey, we want to get into the New York Times. Money's not an issue. You don't have to worry about that. Just get me the art. And here's what we're trying to depict. We are trying to move hearts and minds. This is not we don't need nothing super political. We just want the facts and we want an image that can move the people. And they did. And this is in the Visualizing Palestine. Many of you saw this ad. And for those of you that didn't, I will just tell you from my experiences of people that picked up this ad, even people who randomly emailed me about it on the internet, through the internet, said to me, the minute I turned the page and it came up for me, I felt like those people were walking off the page, that they were talking to me, the little bodies, the tall bodies. I can see the imagery, and it was very moving for our, of course, for our own community to see themselves reflected in a. First of all, I don't know if I will say positive light, but at least in a light where we weren't being demonized during the initial beginning of the genocide, where almost everything the New York Times was saying about our people was negative. This was an opportunity to be in a mainstream paper in a very beautiful, heartfelt, informative way. And I would not have been able to do that without visualizing Palestine.
Thank you so much for this, Linda and Noura. It's at this very dark times that we're living that it encourages us to hear the use of our work on ground and by two amazing people like you, because it could be very easy to feel helpless in the face of what we're witnessing. I just want to start before going into introducing Visualizing Palestine more from the perspective of the team, to actually acknowledge the huge team behind this work and behind this book, because Aline and I are here only as a very, very tiny representative of the many people who contributed to the making of this book. I think it was quite an emotional process for us when we're creating the acknowledgement pages with over 150 contributors that include team members, past and present, and this includes people with various skill sets, researchers, designers, artists, data scientists, people who did fundraising and outreach, and accountants. And I don't want to forget anyone, but each skill set adds to the creation of each visual and each piece of work that we do. But there's also a lot of partners in the movement, a lot of collaborators, individuals and organizations, and translators and volunteers, and all of them. This is really what we're presenting and what we're sharing with the audience today is the result of their work, and we're also sharing it with them and thanking them for their trust in us to bring this work together. But I also want to mention, very importantly, our colleague Jessica Anderson, who is also a co-editor of the book, who's traveling and couldn't join the conversation today. I mean, she's listening, I'm sure. And I mean, everyone who knows Visualizing Palestine knows who Jessica is and knows how she's been really the backbone of the organization for so many years. So maybe I'll tune in a bit more into, I feel like Linda and Noura have already represented VP in such a way that even us cannot represent, but what I want to share is this quote that we used at the beginning of the book, because we have been doing this work for so many years. But when we came across this quote that was written by the Libyan American writer, and it's in a very different context than VP, but we felt that it describes very much the work that we do and why we use visual communication. He said, and I will be paraphrasing, that the English word demonstration has at least two meanings. One refers to the public act of protest, to march, rally, declare, or express an opinion. And the other is to do with showing, with making something manifest or apparent in order to instruct or display. He then continues to say that the Arabic word muzahara, which means protest, comes or has in it the word zuhur, which means visibility. And it's the same in Persian, it's the same in French, it's the same in Italian and Spanish and other languages actually, despite their variant linguistic roots. And for him, it seemed to make perfect sense that one could argue in order to protest, one needs to make something clear. And I think this describes very well what we're doing and our mission from the beginning. And we think of ourselves as really a very small part of a much bigger and very strong movement that has existed for years and is getting stronger, actually, despite all the efforts to diminish it. And I love what one of the users of our visuals said at one point, that we are like the visual arm of the resistance, or like the visual arm of the movement. And for me, this was actually the inspiration behind the cover of the book, that you see one hand is protesting and the other hand is drawing and writing. And we think of ourselves as the connection between the two, Like we're bridging this gap because there's a lot of information and there's a lot of data out there. And what we do is that we take this data and we do meticulous research, but we humanize the data, we contextualize it, we verify it, and then we simplify it to put it in the hands of many groups of people who uses this work. Before getting deeper into the content of the book, I just want to mention this visual, the hunger strikes visual, which was the first visual the team created back in 2012. And this visual, I think, set the path on the way that visualizing Palestine works. This visual at the time, it was to comment on the imprisonment of Khadr Adnan and the hunger strike that he was going through. He was going through his 66th day to protest the being imprisoned and the conditions of imprisonment without charge or trial. And this is not a unique story. This is a very common story for Palestinian prisoners. And what the team did at the time is that they took this and they contextualized and humanized this information. So they asked the question, what does it mean? What does the human body go through as you go through hunger strike? And what you see is the evolution is day by day, what happens to the human body from a medical perspective. So it's something that I think every human can relate to, Palestinian or not, but also contextualizing that this is not a single story, and this has always been a way to peacefully protest, and it has been the way throughout history. So what we did is that we inserted throughout this timeline examples of figures throughout history who have used hunger strike as a tool for peaceful protest, including Nelson Mandela, Laila Swave, Gandhi, and others. And as many of us know, that Khadr Adnan actually died in 2023, and he died as a result of medical neglect in Israeli prison after spending 6 years in prison. And in that way, the visual does not become only a tool for protest and for education, but also a document, a historic document of what once happened. I think I will pass it on from here to Aline to better introduce the book.
Thank you so much, Yosra. And I think also what's important about what you're saying is that this book is both a reflection, like a documentation of oppression, but it's also a documentation of Palestinians have been resisting this oppression. And I think this is a theme that's recurrent throughout the book that's really important, because we don't just want to focus on what it means to be oppressed, but we also want to uplift all the resistance that Palestinians and allies have put into really completely not accepting the status quo, which is really important. So I guess I want to talk a little bit more about the book here and give a bit more context around, how we developed it, and I want to also share my special thanks to Jessica Anderson, who basically, to be honest with you, like if she had not taken on this project 3 years ago, or more than 3 years ago, it wouldn't have happened. So, so really grateful to her for being persistent in making this happen. So the book is, if you look at it, it's quite a heavy book. It's more than 200 visuals, almost 400 pages. There's, we have 12 themes, essays, including a special project section. But really the important part about this book is that we're building on the significant progress the Palestinian liberation movement has made to mainstream understanding of key frameworks. You'll see the frameworks that we're talking about there. If you're familiar with Palestine, then you're familiar with these frameworks. We're talking about settler colonialism, apartheid, ongoing Nakba, which are all interconnected. And we're using, and Palestinians have been using these frameworks to express our lived reality and experiences, and also resisting normalizing those systems of oppression that impact us on a daily basis. Our hope as a team is that this book will be one of many tools that people can use to increase understanding of Israeli colonization and the struggle against it, but also to compel people to continue to use those tools as tools for action, which is, what also Linda and Noura referred to in their comments at the beginning of this conversation. We encourage people to buy the book. This is like without, saying this is a book launch, if you haven't already. And we hope that this book makes clear that both the oppressive conditions that have been imposed on Palestinians, as well as Palestinian resistance to oppression from the birth of the BDS movement in 2005 to ongoing popular protests against colonial oppressions, to hunger strikes, to counter mapping, to cultural assertion of who we are, to resistance through existence, and finally through storytelling as a form of resistance to Israeli dispossession, not only of our lands, but also of our stories. And I can't, emphasize this enough, because part of the Israeli occupation and oppression system is to erase our stories and not just our presence on our land. We finished writing this book in the summer of 2023, so more than a year ago. And in October until December 2023, we had to rewrite parts of this book as we witnessed the start of another Nakba scale crisis, what we've all come to quickly understand as a textbook case of genocide in Palestine. In the first 7 weeks of Israel's bombardment of Gaza, we saw Israel kill more Palestinians than in the previous 34 years. And this is something that we talk about in the book. And of course, the numbers have risen so much more in the past few months. As the number of Palestinians killed, missing under the rubble, injured, displaced, thirsty, starving, and sick continues to rise, a main focus of VP's work is to make sure that we do not compromise our people's dignity or portray them as perfect victims. As Muhammad al-Kurd says, I really appreciate Muhammad's analysis of this, because it has been painful how the media and many people are trying to portray us as perfect victims. As we mentioned in this book, the human brain is not designed to comprehend mass atrocities at the scale that we are witnessing today. And it's part of our role and responsibility at Visualizing Palestine to help draw attention to these mass atrocities and convey the meaning of that data in a visually powerful and compelling fashion. And this includes going beyond the numbers and telling people stories, because stories are data too. And this is something that we talk about all the time at VP, and something that also Linda in that New York Times article comes out very quickly, right? That it's not just about the numbers, it's about the stories of people that have been killed. And even though, and I think this is a really important part of the book, because we were talking about this as a team, the data that we produce becomes outdated almost immediately at times. But the context of colonization, apartheid, and ongoing Nakba continues to remain relevant. And the data for the time that we produce the data is relevant. People can look at the history and look at what happened during that time. I want to actually just end with a couple of direct quotes from the book. This does not mean that you shouldn't buy the book. You should still buy the book and experience it yourself. But the book basically opens up with a dedication that is very personal for us. And it says, for all Palestinians, past, present, and future, may these visuals one day be artifacts for free generations to remember the journey to justice. This is our ultimate goal. We document, we tell our stories with the goal that one day we will be free. And as also we say in the introduction, we hope that this book, that I'm quoting directly here, we hope that this book can be a source of inspiration and imagination as we work for a world in which these visuals are obsolete, not because they need to be updated with even more dire figures, but because the fundamental conditions of oppression have given way to justice. In the book, we refer to an essay that novelist Toni Morrison wrote amid the US war on Iraq and the re-election of George W. Bush, titled No Place for Self-Pity, No Room for Fear, in which she recounts feeling too helpless to write. A friend tells her, "No, no, no, no. This is precisely the time when artists go to work, not when everything is fine, but in times of dread." And in the book, we continue to say, these are times of dread indeed, but this is not unfamiliar terrain for any community that has struggled for freedom. It is widely understood that times of crisis open up possibilities for transformation. These are the possibilities we will keep pursuing relentlessly. End quote. And we know that the community gathered here today for this launch will continue to do the same. We know that Israel wants us to give up, and this is not the time to give up. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all buy the book and put it into good use. Noura, I'd like to pass on to you.
Thank you for that very, very powerful opening, Aline. It was very grounding, and I love that you pulled from Toni Morrison. I'm actually reading her right now and reading Song of Solomon. Morrison's work is actually an encapsulation of how imperfect we are as humans. So picking up on this critique of the demand for perfect victims that Muhammad al-Kurd so eloquently captures, right? It's the mobilization of all of our imperfections, which is a reflection of our humanity, not a negation of it, in order somehow to justify our mass slaughter and an eliminatory campaign. And so I as much as I often drag my feet reading Morrison because it's such a hard read, what she does is she tells stories predominantly of Black communities, all Black communities. None of the characters are even slightly normal. They're all so problematic. And yet so human. And I think, it's so fitting that you put those together. Similarly, in the quote that you lift up, no, 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 now is the time to continue in the moments of dread. I think we've all felt like that. I've certainly felt like that multiple times this past 11 months, but I felt like that over the many years where I keep thinking every intervention will be my last. Like, this is it. Like, I've given what I have, right? I certainly felt that with justice for some. Khalas, let me, and we can't. What becomes clear is, our even thought of that is approximating surrender, which we do not have the option to do. And I saw Ahmed Al-Quta, a brilliant journalist from Gazzar, recently in a video with the Kuwait Times, share this in a different way, where Palestinians in Gaza, right? Because hope is a discipline, as Angela Davis teaches us, right? It's not, it's not out there in the world. It's actually a muscle, and all muscles have to be developed. And he highlights that for Palestinians in Gaza, hope isn't an option. It has to be. It's a fixture, because the alternative is, in fact, to lay down and allow Israel to continue what it's doing. They are certainly bearing the brunt of our national liberation movement. They are bearing the most tremendous sacrifice of our people in this time. They are bearing a disproportionate burden of our liberation, for which we can never take for granted. And for that, I want to just center that contribution. Our contribution next to that is nothing, really. And so with that kind of, humility, I wanted to share a few things, for the framing, and I'll try to be brief so that we can turn to some images that help to tell the story. which is the story of, frameworks of settler colonialism and where ongoing Nakba and apartheid and genocide would fit in also. So as we started in talking about, settler colonial mythology, let me just start with a definition for folks that we can lift up. So many scholars in the resurrection of settler colonial studies as, as a return to settler colonial studies in the 2000s have cited the belated, precious Patrick Wolf, may he rest in peace and power, in providing us, a framework, because he was speaking from Australia as, someone with settler status there, a framework of thinking that settler colonialism is not an event, it is a process. And it is a process that features the elimination of an indigenous people in order to replace them with a settler society and sovereign. But we as Palestinians have had our own scholars and, academic scholar activists and activist scholars who have provided this theorization, namely among them for me is Fayez Sayegh, who in 1965 publishes the pamphlet in, his role as the director of the PLO Research Center of Zionist colonization of Palestine, where he highlights that the distinction between, Zionism in Palestine and other forms of colonialism in the world is that where other forms of colonialism in the world were predicated on and featured grotesque domination, extraction, exploitation, right? That settler colonialism was marked by an eliminationist quality, right? So we've already had this language that there is a feature of elimination. Why elimination? Unlike in what might be considered traditional colonialism, where the settler travels from the metropole to a colonized geography, they leave their sovereignty in the metropole. The British remain British, whether they're in India, whether they're in Jamaica, whether they're in Malay, whether they're in Palestine, whether they're in Egypt, they are British. As opposed to the settler who intends to stay, who upon leaving the metropole takes their sovereignty with them to assert it. So here, the British person becomes American, an American sovereign to assert that sovereignty in North America, where more than 500 indigenous nations exist. That British person becomes Australian. That British person becomes New Zealander, right? And similarly, when it or that Dutch person or British person becomes Afrikaner in South Africa, where the French person becomes Algerian somehow in Algeria, and in our case, the Jewish person transforms into a juridical category of now a Zionist settler sovereign in Palestine. It is that traveling with their sovereignty that creates a mutually exclusive equation whereby two sovereignties, and what is sovereignty? Here I'm being a bit of a teacher. Sovereignty is the uncontested authority to govern, right? And so it's not that these travelers, right, these settlers are coming as visitors or as immigrants to then abide by Palestinian law, right? They are coming to be masters in that place and to have the exclusive right to govern, which then is in contrast, mutually exclusive contrast with the Palestinian sovereignty, their right to govern, their right as a political community intent on forging their collective future, economic, social, cultural, political, however they see fit, also known as self-determination. Those come in contest. To resolve that contest, the settler sovereign wants to eliminate the native, right? And so that then features, that then governs and controls the overall structure. And we see that in Palestine from the moment of inception, and the establishment of the Israeli state in 1948, and obviously well before, as Zionism takes, more concrete form, where the idea is to remove the Palestinians to establish a Jewish state in their place that is featured by a Jewish demographic majority. So here, this isn't just about taking their place, but ensuring and manufacturing a a certain 80% population of Jewish Israelis or Zionist settler sovereigns, right? That makes just the existence of Palestinians an ongoing threat. So Palestinians are securitized, right? Palestinians are racialized as an inherent threat for the mere fact of existing, not for the threat they pose to anybody with a knife or a gun or a bomb or what have you, for existing. And that's how they are racialized within Israeli law. That's how they are treated in its military law and its carceral law and its administrative law. It's how they're treated in their civil law. And so this singular jurisdiction, right, in the settler colonial framework makes it so that Israel has pursued two goals all the time. The first is to take as much Palestinian land as possible. The second is to have as little number of Palestinians on that land as possible. So what do you do with the Palestinians that you remove? You either kill them, remove them beyond the border, right? Or you concentrate them into reservations, as we've seen in the North American context of settler colonialism, as Bantustans, as we've seen in the South African context, or what we know in our context, right? As Gaza, the West Bank, areas A, B, and C, what Nabil Sha'ath in 1971 described as Palestines, in referencing Bantustans, described them as Palestines. Okay, that work is accomplished, right, of removal, of ongoing removal, through a singular jurisdiction of law, right, whereby the application looks different in different geographies, but the goal is the same. And law is used to accomplish this. It's military law in the West Bank in order to accomplish it. It's a mix of military and administrative law in East Jerusalem. It's the mobilization of civil law. And that's the work where we see, Adala, the Legal Justice Center in Palestine, forwarding for us to demonstrate the inherent inequality of the indigenous people of Palestine, also who have citizenship in the state. And then all-out warfare in Gaza since 1993, when, in preparation for the so-called peace process, Israel begins to circumscribe the Gaza Strip with barbed wire in order to separate it from the rest of a Palestinian geography and to create a statelet therein. And we see that intensification throughout the years, most vividly in 2005 upon unilateral withdrawal, and then explicitly from 2008 onwards when Israel begins its large-scale offensive against the besieged population under its occupation, right? But all of it is in pursuit of the removal of Palestinians, the acquisition of a greater amount of territory, and the diminishment of the Palestinian population altogether. And sometimes it doesn't even happen through this outright dispossession and removal. Sometimes it just happens in the realm of law. So if you think about the way that UNRWA is constantly a target, the United Nations Relief Works Agency is constantly a target of Israel and its apologists, right, and its supporters, including the U.S. government most prominently, right? It's precisely in order to challenge the status of who is a Palestinian refugee, which is also a form of dispossession and removal, right? Forwarded by a tremendous amount of mythology that somehow Palestinian descendants of refugees are treated distinctly, when in fact they're treated exactly the same as all other refugees who have the right to return, to repatriation, to resettlement. So here, I just want to then apply a certain number of categories that correspond to the visuals. Palestinians describe this dispossession that happens between 47 and 49, right? 47 at the start of what we describe as the Arab-Israeli War of 1948 and the establishment of armistice agreements or temporary agreements meant to hold place until a permanent peace in 1949. The removal of some 750,000 Palestinians. That's the initial removal beyond the border, and then their forced exile. But that process of removal never stops. And that is why Palestinians refer to this condition as our ongoing Nakba. So what is to be made then? Then isn't apartheid and genocide redundant, right? And in fact, in many ways it is. Apartheid, when it was legislated as a regime, right, that was a crime, it was first captured in the 1965 Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And it was done so as part of a global effort in order to dismantle this, discriminatory, eliminatory regime in South Africa and Southwest Africa, now known as Namibia. It then becomes legislated as its crime against humanity in 1973 in its own convention. And when it was done so, it was referred to, today so often and mistakenly, people think of apartheid as just a grotesque form of racism. That's why a lot of Palestinians hate when people call Israel apartheid. Actually hate it, because they feel like, no, that doesn't, we're not an equal rights movement. We're not like moving for like the voting, a civil rights act that is in the United States. We want our land back. We want to end colonization. And so here I just want to tell my fellow siblings, I agree with you completely, but this is a misunderstanding of apartheid, because in its initial conceptualization, it was not seen as a peculiar form of racism. It was actually described as a peculiar, by the South African Communist Party, as a peculiar form of colonialism. And it's this it's the idea that this racism has a global dimension captured in the colonial framework, not merely what we see now, the attempt to domesticate racism. Racism is only a matter for the United States, is only a matter for each of the countries that deals with it. To the contrary, this is a global dimension of racism that informs what function is it serving to make a people inferior in order to enrich a superior racial class. That analysis is not complete without the global dimension, and apartheid in its inception attempted to capture it. What it does in our case is it consolidates, right? It consolidates the colonial takings of the Zionist movement and expands them in order to entrench it. And so those who want to dismantle apartheid want to dismantle that structure. Is that the same as decolonization? Not necessarily. And so it's important to highlight that this isn't a movement, a juridical movement, right, for equality, but it is a movement for decolonization that features apartheid. So let me go back in history. Why are we using apartheid and not just saying we're anti-Zionist, which is in fact what we are? It's because in 1975, again, Fayez Sayegh, along with a radical PLO, right? An emancipatory body, not a governing body, an emancipatory body for our liberation, mobilized in the General Assembly in 1975 to amend a decade against racism, to condemn Zionism everywhere the words colonialism and apartheid appeared in the text. This was a long battle. I write about it elsewhere. I'm happy to share that. But this was a long battle that culminates, right, in Resolution 3379 of 75 that condemns Zionism as a form of racism and racial discrimination. The PLO rescinded that resolution in 1991 as a precondition for entering Oslo, or what exists as our sovereignty trap. And so I'll stop here. And apologies for going on too long, and happy to discuss further.
Thank you so much, Noura. You basically summarized, all of those visuals that exist in 4 chapters, and there's so much more to dig into. I do want to pass it on to Linda, because Linda has to leave us at 12. And I was hoping that you can zoom into, a little bit of the work on Gaza and U.S. complicity in particular. And yeah, would love your reflections on these.
Thank you so much, Aline, and thank you so much, Dr. Noura, for laying that out so beautifully. And thank you, John, for literally matching Noura's words with the beautiful imagery of visualizing Palestine. And I actually thought it was like double powerful to be able to hear the words and see the imagery together. I think that you said this earlier, Aline, that, you know, Palestine is one of those social justice causes, human rights causes that continue and move. And sometimes we say something happened and then something else happens that makes a thing that we said earlier. There's no standing in time, basically. And so it has been very important for the work of visualizing Palestine to depict the human suffering of the Palestinian people in a way that is data driven, right? That shows the numbers of those who have been impacted by this current genocide, being able to demonstrate the numbers of homes that have been destroyed, the types of weapons that are being used in Gaza. I think for me as an organizer and a movement builder, and being able to develop intersectional conversations, seeing some of the imagery from visualizing Palestine around equating the funding that we are using in this moment in the last 11 months with what we could be funding in the United States when it comes to education. And we are part of so many healthcare access, housing and affordable housing and free public housing fights across the country, and being able to use these imagery to explain to our neighbors who may not be keen or understand much about Palestine, to say, it doesn't matter what you understand about the people of Palestine, who the Palestinian people are, or the history of Palestine. But when people understand the resources that are being used here, that we are using, that is American taxpayer dollars, and knowing how much we need for public education, for ensuring that our children have, basic necessities like food and housing, it's very moving. It's very moving to our neighbors and to movement people who do not work on foreign policy issues. And so for me, being able to depict also the ways in which the United States is complicit in this has been very important, because sometimes people think this is very bad. We see children blown up to pieces. We see bloodshed. And then it becomes like it's something over there. But that being able to visualize how deeply and intricately we each as individual Americans are complicit ourselves because of our government has really helped us in the movement in ways that I think are very powerful. And I think for me also, personally, being able to demonstrate to our allies as we're having conversations, when people say, what do we do then? We are with you. This is outrageous, my friends. Like, we should not be sending our taxpayer dollars to murder, maim, and destroy Palestinians or Palestinian society. And that's where we get to the asks. What is a weapons embargo? What does it mean? What does it visually look like when we're asking our friends to join us in the demand to end military aid to Israel, right? Back, I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, if we ever said, we did, Palestinians did, and of course, those more on the, some spectrum of the left would explicitly say end military aid to Israel. It was supposedly controversial. It was like outrageous that we would say end aid to Israel, just don't give them any money. Now it's a mainstream ask. And because of the work of academics and activists and organizers and artists in our movement, we are now at a place where, the major Black preachers in this country, coalitions of Black churches are coming out and saying, yeah, we're with them. We support an end to military aid to Israel. Referring back to even the New York Times, our New York Times ad that we did with Visualizing Palestine was the impetus for a full-page New York Times ad that was put in by Black preachers across this country. At that time, it was over 900 preachers demanding in this moment an immediate ceasefire. That was in the beginning of the genocide, when there were many who were not yet willing to say ceasefire. I think also looking at the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, and that it was another controversial movement. God forbid you supported this idea of constitutionally protected boycott and divestment, a tactic and strategy that has been used in almost every movement for some sort of justice or freedom ever in the history of ever. And we could probably take this back even prior to ending South African apartheid. And so for me, using the visuals of what does it mean to boycott, divest, at least as individuals and organizations, right? We have to, number one, demonstrate the harm. So when we're showing or choosing a corporation, for example, or a weapons manufacturer, being able to visually depict what harm is this entity committing against the Palestinian people? What is the intersection between our lives and these corporations? And where these corporations are also operating, they're not operating independently. Sometimes they're operating through their resources, through cultural institutions, even through academic institutions and universities. We find that a lot of our universities are actually invested in weapons manufacturer companies, or they're invested in entities in the state of Israel. So having visualized Palestine be able to take the call from Palestinian civil society to boycott and divest from Israel as a nonviolent call to put pressure on the state of Israel to end occupation and end siege required, at least for us, some sort of visual. And that is actually one of the reasons why we went to visualizing Palestine on Citibank. It's not enough to say that Citibank is problematic. It's not enough to say that Citibank is the largest financial institution in the state of Israel. It's not enough just to even say word-wise that not only are they the largest financial institution, but when the United States is shipping weapons to the state of Israel, if the United States has or is giving them a payment, that Citibank will front the money. They are fronting money for occupation, for genocide. That is how complicit a financial institution like Citibank is. And so for us, having visualizing Palestine, take our passion, take our research, and be able to manifest it into actual visuals has been extremely powerful. And not only that, we've been able to build across movements because of that. Because it turns out it ain't just us that think that Citibank is bad. Apparently, Citibank is bad on issues of climate justice and environmental justice, and they are a purveyor against protecting our planet. So now our campaign has built not only solidarity between Palestinians and Haitians in the way that Citibank was a destructive force and continues to be in Haiti, but also with our climate justice activists. And this is the importance of the work that Visualizing Palestine has done, because again, a tool and resource for our movement. Because for me, art is beautiful and I like to admire art, but the most powerful form of art is one that educates and informs me, and also gives me an opportunity to do something about the thing that I am passionate about. You know, the Palestinian people, and I always say this all the time, and I feel, and I'm sure that we all feel the same here. I can't believe that we're here 11 months later. I really can't believe it. I get up every day and I'm like, is this still a nightmare that we're in? That 11 months later, we are still watching the live stream genocide of our people, not only in Gazzar, but now also in the West Bank and also in other parts of the world, including in Lebanon. And it's really, it really, for me, having more tools for our friends who are here today watching on this incredible webinar with Haymarket, we got to keep going, and we have to believe that we still have to invest in informing people about what is happening to the Palestinian people. There is nothing that the Palestinian people are asking for that other people around the world haven't asked for or continue to ask for. We are not asking for any special treatment as the Palestinian people. We just want freedom and liberation. We want to be able to fulfill our aspirations and dreams. Our children want access to higher education, access to thrive. They don't just want to survive occupation. They don't want to survive siege. They want to live freely. And as Americans, we do have overall, and of course, you know, different marginalized people have different experiences of this, but as a Palestinian American in diaspora, or a Palestinian in diaspora, I feel very privileged. And I think that for me, the movement and the students also, for me, have been in the last 11 months such a moment of hope, and being able to watch the informative kind of visualization of the maps of where our students got up and rose up, and being able to see the sacrifices of students all across this country who are willing to give up Harvard degrees. They're willing to give up their monumental graduations that their parents probably only dreamed of. And then when the dream was a reality, they still didn't happen because their children said, I choose Palestine and freedom over walking the stage at Harvard or at Yale. And so there's so much in this visualizing Palestine that we can talk through. And I know you've gotten so much here, and as Aline said, maybe we showed you too much, because there's so much more that you should be using. And for those of you here who are in academia or in movement and organizing space, and even just ordinary people, this is a book that, and I know that you are seeing some of the slides, but I'm old school. Like, I don't have a Kindle, I don't read books on any electronics. I like to have and hold things. And I think this book right here, for me personally, the most important thing about it is that there will be generations to come who will be able to pick up this book. And you said this earlier, Aline. Yes, of course, maybe a decade from now, 20 years from now, this might be just an archive in a museum, because Palestine will be free. None of these things and injustices that we depict through imagery will be a reality, and the reality will be freedom. But someone has to tell the story. And one of the things that I appreciate about scholars and academics and authors and those who write about Palestine is that they're writing things that the people should already know. It's very there. The information is there. The facts are there. But we are telling the story. We are putting the narrative forward. And I want generations to come and say, what was the struggle and history of my people? And this is going to be one of the things that they're going to be able to pick up. We live in a digital era, and only God knows what's going to happen in 20, 30, 40 years and what era we will be there then. But one of the things that is evergreen and always is art. I don't care what part of history go back to, 5,000 years, 6,000 years, or 100 years, or 20 years ago. Art is evergreen. Art is always present in every moment in time. And always in conjunction with struggle, even when the struggle becomes the past and freedom becomes the present and the future. So I'm not telling you folks, this is also, we're coming up. It's the fall now. It's Christmas is around the corner. There are holidays coming up, my friends. This is the kind of gift that I hope that you also are gifting to people in your lives, because again, much of what we're telling you here, many folks who are followers of Haymarket books, who I love so dearly, I try to buy every Haymarket book that comes out, even if it's about an issue that I don't know much about, or maybe don't have. I just buy every book because I want to support people who publish voices like Aline's, like Noura's, like Muhammad al-Qurd's, like so many others, because it's important for us to be able to support those who take risks on our narratives, who want to make sure that our narratives are centered. And I'll just end by saying that, most of you already know much of what we have shared here today. You understand the plight of the Palestinian people. You understand the evil workers and the actors who continue to profit off of the genocide, and also the long-standing occupation or slow genocide and ethnic cleansing of our people for decades now. And you're here more from me personally. I came here because I want you to be an ambassador to this work. I think we are in a very exhausting place, and I am in awe of Palestinians who get up every day and organize and teach and move around fighting for justice for the Palestinian people. But we need more people out there. And sometimes people say, Linda, I don't know what I can do. What else? What more can I do? And one of the most powerful things that people underestimate often is those individual conversations, is giving gifts like this and saying, just check this out, look in here, learn, and then you learn and teach others. And this domino effect of teaching and educating and passing information on from one person to the next, this is how we win, my friends. People think it's going to be some magical thing that happens one day, and then the next day we wake up and Palestine is free. That's not how this works. It's never worked in this way before. It takes commitment. It takes true faith and belief that right now, even through all the horror that you are experiencing and seeing coming out of Gaza and the West Bank and that part in the region, I want you to know that even through all the bloodshed, the pools of blood and the rivers of blood in Gaza, that I see freedom. I feel it. It makes me get up every day. And it makes me more encouraged and motivated every day to teach and get more people to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And to be clear, the solidarity is there. And it is in every corner of this world. And I think what we're trying to do is to translate that solidarity into a power that influences those who have the decision-making power in this moment, to at least alleviate as much suffering and harm against our people. And then inshallah, one day, a true and full liberation for the Palestinian people. So thank you, Visualizing Palestine. You don't have to do this work. You could probably be doing art for some other causes and stuff and make a whole lot more money than you are making right now. but this is a labor of love, but it's also a labor for freedom and liberation. And I'm so honored just to have my hand on this book, but also to see the incredible people. So Aline told you this earlier, but you know, the usual friends of ours, from Mark Lamont Hill to Dr. Noura, to Arundhati Roy, who people love very much, Mariam Barghouti, Naomi Klein. There's so many people that are telling you, get the book, and you could actually get, this is not a pre-order situation. Go to Haymarket Books. They are selling it. Try not to buy it from Amazon. Buy it from Haymarket directly, and let's make sure this book gets as far and wide as possible.
Thank you so much, Linda. This was incredible, and I do have to say that part of, you know, I'm always so inspired by Linda and Noura and so many people in our movement that really just help me get through the day, to be honest with you. And you know, we don't say this enough, but it's this persistence and this patience, right? Because we know that change will not happen overnight. We know that we're in this for the long haul. And when I think about the work that we do at Visualizing Palestine, I keep thinking, you know, we have to be consistent, we have to be persistent, we have to continue, because at some point in life, I want to look back at what I've done in my life and feel proud that I've been part of this movement. And I know it's not enough, and it's not one person's work, it's many people. And I do believe that the movement is growing. There is public consciousness that's changing. And it's because people are not giving up, right? And because we continue to do this work. Thank you both so much for everything. And also my colleagues at Visualizing Palestine. Honestly, like, I also they help me get through the day, and I know that we all, you know, support each other, because it has been a really terrible year, but it is not at all anything in comparison to what our loved ones are going through in Gaza and in the West Bank. I know Linda just left us. I wanted to see if there's anything else that Noura and Yosra wanted to say. I know that there might be questions from the audience as well, and we're happy to take those.
I just really want to thank Noura and Linda, because we have designed this perfect outline where we thought we would go through the visuals and the content of the visuals, and we have already summarized a lot of what is in the book. We have about 12 chapters that we try to pick out 4 or 5. But this is first of all a constant struggle when you're working with research and data, that there's so much out there and there's so much that we want to tell. And our work is to take all this information and simplify it so that it can disseminate and reach a much wider audience, and really for everyone to understand. But so thank you for Noura and Linda, who described everything that we have been trying to summarize in the visuals. But I also want to say that it might seem a lot, but actually one of the points of creating Visualizing Palestine, and this book in particular, is to say that it's not complicated, and it's not a unique case. And as Noura was saying, that this settler colonialism we have seen throughout history and in so many places, apartheid is not a new concept. It's not a unique case. What is happening on ground and in scale that we cannot imagine, especially in 2024. But eventually what we want people to understand, and through this process of simplification of visual, is that we want people to understand that, to understand the core of it, and that it's not actually that complicated. And this is why we designed the book to be, in a way, if you want, as a reader, it could be a bird-eye view of the story of colonialism and the struggle for liberation. It's a fat book, but it's mostly visuals with essays to contextualize it. But at the same time, for the deep learner and for the educators, that there's a lot of research and information that you can dig into if you want. So it can offer both. I don't know if Noura, you have anything to add, or we can go into questions if there are any.
Unfortunately, I also have to leave, but I want to say يعطيكم ألف ألف عافية. I was there when Visualizing Palestine came into being. And I have had the privilege of commenting and providing, some of the footnotes or the stats or the feedback on images in the making. And now I'm a beneficiary of Visualizing Palestine in its offering. And so, يعطيكم ألف ألف عافية. Thank you for the work made. Be so self-evident as to become irrelevant. And that's the work that we're all doing. We're working as hard as possible so that we can become irrelevant.
Thank you so much, Noura, and thank you so much for joining us. And I know how busy you are, so much appreciation to you. We'll move into some of the questions. We got some questions in the chat, and Yosra, you can decide to start or whatever. I'll read them out. And thank you, Noura.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
So we have one question around if we can say a bit more about how we select topics or themes for visuals, and what new pieces are coming up. So maybe you want to take the part about how we select topics, Yosra. I can add to it, and then I can talk a little bit about what's coming up.
Yes, sure. How we select topics, it depends on a variety of things. One thing is that we see what is most needed and crucial and essential at the time. So, for example, at the time when apartheid was becoming a term that's becoming a bit more mainstream and used by bigger international human rights organizations, there was an overall movement that we felt that we needed to be a part of. So whenever there's something that's crucial that's happening right now in the movement, we want to make sure that we provide the visual tools for it. That's one thing that we do, but we also do the opposite. We also observe what is essential, but we don't think is out there. We don't think that people are talking about enough, or that it's mentioned enough. So those are two things that we try to balance, and we also try to see what kind of new information and research and data that's out there that's highlighting something that's maybe we even as an audience didn't know before. So we also make sure that we're up to date with the data and the research that's coming out of Palestinian organization, local Palestinian organization, national organizations. And of course, there are a lot of new visuals coming up, and this has been a problem actually while creating the book, that we're producing visuals, but at the same time we need to close on the book. So we marked the end of the visuals that were produced in 2023 as the visuals in the book, but since then we have produced a number of visuals and continue to produce.
Thank you so much, Yosra. Yeah, I guess I think I'd like to mention a couple of things. So when the genocide began to unfold in Gaza, our team actually kind of shifted the way that we do work. We decided that it was very important to put the work that we had on our plates for the end of the year last year to shift and to put the situation in Gaza in context for people who were seeking out that information, who wanted to know what was happening. It was a window of opportunity in a way to educate people who knew nothing and who wanted to understand the situation. And I think a lot of organizations in the movement did that shift. So we produce a lot of projects in partnership with other partners in the movement, with movement actors. And we had to even put some of these partnerships to the side. If you've been watching or following Visualizing Palestine over the past, in 2024, you'll notice that we've been doing much more work in collaboration with partners, because part of what is important to us is also to amplify campaigns and projects that partners are working on, and that where they need visuals to pressure governments or to pressure corporations to move on certain issues. So I wanted to also provide that framing over the next several big projects, but I think you'll see them soon because we've been working on them for quite some time. One of the visuals that will actually release this week, so keep an eye out on that, is on torture and imprisonment of Palestinian women in Gaza, and it is based on stories and testimonials of women that have gone through that experience. It's very similar to, or it's an extension of a visual that we produced earlier this year on the conditions that men experience in Israeli prisons, or in basically torture camps, is what we're calling them. So you'll see that we're working on two really big projects. One is in collaboration with Law for Palestine, where they already have an amazing comprehensive database on that, where they're quoting or they're categorizing statements, genocidal statements by Israeli government officials, because as you all know, part of that genocide definition is the intent to commit genocide, right? So it's a really important legal compilation of those statements, and the database already exists. We're just organizing in a different way that makes it a bit more accessible, and we will be also producing an interactive visual that goes alongside this very important tool for the movement to hold Israel accountable. And of course, as you all know, a lot of those statements, genocidal statements, are very eerily similar to some genocidal statements that Israeli officials have made over the years since before the Nakba in 1948. Another really big project is that we're working on with an amazing partner called Continentalist, look them up, is on the destruction of culture in Gaza. And this is a really important topic. It's been widely documented, but we really wanted to bring attention to this consistent, culture side, because part of genocide is really to completely destroy a society's culture. So look out for that over the next couple of months as well. There's more. I know I'm missing a few. Oh, there's one where we're working on the gendered aspect of genocide in Gaza, and also how military occupation is impacting gender or gendered violence, basically, in the West Bank. So these are a few of the things that we're working on. We're also working on anti-Palestinian racism, a visual on anti-Palestinian racism and how that has increased and is manifested in places, especially in Western Europe and the US. So I think I've covered most of them. About the story of the New York Times, that one actually, the question is, the story of the New York Times ad was really amazing. Are there any other pieces that you think have been especially impactful and effective in the way that Linda was describing? I think particularly the New York Times ad went quite viral. I think it's hard for me to refer to a specific visual. I would say that many of our visuals that, for example, Linda also referred to, student encampments and how students use visualizing Palestine's work. One of the visuals, or several of the visuals that students make use of extensively is those on divestment. They use them as tools in their universities to push for divestment campaigns, and learning from the history of South African divestment from apartheid as well. So there's so much in the portfolio that's being used quite extensively. Obviously, the New York Times ad was very specific. It targeted a specific audience, but many of our visuals are used extensively by students, and that's a really important group, and that's the group that to be honest with you, I have much hope in, because they're really pushing the boundaries of those schools who are supposed to really embody and give space for students to learn, while what they're doing, in fact, is silencing students on a topic that is so important to talk about. So these are some of the things. Let me see if there what other questions. I'm not sure how we'd get nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. I don't think I have an answer for that one. But it would be interesting to. We haven't really ourselves applied to any prizes, and that's really, even though we have a history of winning several awards, over the years that Yosra knows a little bit more intimately about. Okay, so the question is, the second question is that, we're doing great work and creating great visuals. Where do we see VP as a whole in 10 to 20 years? I think that's a great question. I would hope that VP does not exist in 10, 20 years. I hope that we see liberation by then. I think it's as I said, this is not work this is not change that we can see immediately. It takes time to really get to liberation. I do think that one thing I would see is, VP's mission changing in 10, 20 years when we get liberation, and to cover other aspects, of what it's like to live in freedom. And I'm sure, obviously, there are other issues that come up, right? In society. Even if you get rid of apartheid, which is what we saw in South Africa, the remnants of what that has done and the impact that it has on the community is something that is also systemic, and that you need to continue to address. But yes, this is where my hope and where I would want to see us in 10, 20 years. Yosra, is there anything else you wanted to add? I think we don't have many more questions.
No, I think you covered it all.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope that you get your hands on the book, and please share, photos with us, reflections with us. I really want to thank Haymarket Books for making this book happen. They were the ones who approached us a few years ago to work on this book, and without their persistence and their patience, this book wouldn't have happened. So thank you, everyone at Haymarket, for working with us on this book, and for putting such an important book for us and our team, and hopefully for the movement out there. Everyone, please stay in touch. If you need to reach out to us, you can always reach out to us at data@visualizingpalestine.org with any questions, comments, and reflections on the book. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say that while this has been difficult to actually communicate with someone you're not seeing, and we're to be back into the virtual spaces, but we're also going to be present in different cities with a number of book launches and in-person events. So we hope to see you there as well. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Haymarket.